talk to you about this bizarre thing that happened at the Guigar household just a few days ago.
Oh no, is this something that I won't want to hear? I don't like the word bizarre. Bizarre sets up a threat level.
No. It's not bizarre. It's bizarre. Okay, there's two different types of bizarre.
You pronounce that almost like Dr. Ben Shahar. You said bizarre.
I forgot about Ben Shahar.
Dr. Ben Shahar.
He's one of my favorites from the show. Him and Susan McTaggart. I think maybe we should have a whole side story where we talk about a love affair between those two.
I was just going to say, Dr. Ben Shahar and Susan McTaggart find love.
It'll be a ComicLab special. We'll have to write that.
A very special ComicLab, yeah. When a working psychologist and an inspirational speaker bump into one another at the subway, love ensues.
I'm
anyway,
there
go ahead.
for
So
it.
the bizarre Guigar effect. What was that?
So I'm at the studio, and actually my intern was in that day, who's been doing the animated ComicLab podcast clips.
Oh, I love them. She's so talented. It's great.
Dude, she taught herself Animate on the fly. She taught herself Adobe Animate on the fly to do that because she's like, I want to learn animation. I'm like, well, I've got a project for you. You know?
That kind of self-starting thing for a young artist fills me with hope because she has an amazing career ahead of her. You know, when she's like, I'm going to tackle this whole thing by myself. I'll be over here learning the entire program.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
She's phenomenal. Asia Blackshear, by the way, if you want to look her up, she is so good. But anyway, she's over here. We're working. We're chortling away. And my wife calls. And she goes, so I came home from work, and the kids were off. By the way, this is important. Both boys were off on a trip with their grandparents. Okay. They went on a little trip and to look at Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. Because my younger son has really been interested in architecture, and my older son was into it. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll go on a trip, and we'll see some houses and whatnot.
Where did they go? Falling Water? Or which one did they go to?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Hey, that's cool. That Falling Water is my favorite one of his. That house is amazing.
Yeah. So they're off. The house is empty. My wife gets home from work. She calls me and she says, so there's a dog in the house. And I said,
what?
What? And she says, there's a dog right now sleeping on our living room sofa. And I can hear the dog happily bark, at the news, right? And I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't put a dog in the house. The house has been empty since I left it. How did a dog get in the house? She's all happy. I don't know, she says, but there's a dog in the house. I go, wait a minute. Is there somebody upstairs, like, sleeping it off?
Oh, no. I wouldn't have thought about that.
Did somebody, that's the first place my brain went to. It's like, did somebody, break in, look for a good place to, lie down for a little while?
Can I just say, in contrast to friendship, my brain went, hooray, a dog. Your brain went, murderer. There's a murderer in the house.
There's a vagrant upstairs.
Meanwhile, I'm just imagining a Happy Tail. Happy Tail, let's get him a bone. You're like, there's someone with a knife.
And Carolyn was the same way. I'm like, have you gone upstairs yet? She says, it's a dog, it's brown with white spots, and it's a dog. And I'm like, wait. Do you want to go upstairs while I'm on the phone? She says, he's wagging his little tail. And I'm like, stop! You've got to concentrate. There may be danger. And I couldn't get her to concentrate. She was like just off to the races. And so she's like, well,
Brad, so here's the problem, though. And maybe you're not familiar with this. What she was experiencing this, and your heart might not be familiar, is joy. And so you've got to allow people to feel joy, Brad. That's the kicker. She's like, oh, hooray, a dog. No, quiet. What are you doing? What's happening? Why are you smiling and laughing? What is that?
Oh, you know what? I know you're joking, but that's exactly what was happening in our phone conversation. So I stand up and I go to Asia. I go, that's it. Day's over. We're going home because she's not searching the house and someone has to search the house and I need to go home. So I take Asia to the train station. I go home and I caught really good traffic for some reason. Shot down 95, come in, and there's Carolyn with this dog, happy as can be. And she says, don't bother searching upstairs. She says, I found out the answer. And I said, what? She says, well, I called the number on his dog tag, and the dog belongs to the neighbor 3 doors down.
Oh.
I go, what's he doing here?
Was there a window open or a door open?
No, I'm looking all over for something like that. Well, it turns out, and originally I blamed the kids. Turns out, old dad here left the basement door unlocked when he left for the studio. And the dog walker that picked up the dog at the neighbor's house, it was the dog walker's first day on the job, and he got confused as to which house he was at. And our garage looks somewhat like the garage. We've got the old carriage style doors on the garage, like from a horse's carriage. And so do they. And he thought he was at the house that he was supposed to be at. And he opened up the door and it was unlocked. So he let the dog in.
Oh, my God.
And so he lets the dog in, leaves the leash in the basement, turns around, sets the, and the doorknob, there's a little thing that you turn clockwise and then the door is locked.
Brad, try to spot the dog walker that's not getting a tip that week.
Oh, my God. Our neighbor was furious.
As you should be. Your dog ends up 3 doors down in a different house.
Well, and if Carolyn had decided she was going to go out for drinks with friends, and if she would have stayed out and I would have stayed at the studio, this guy would have come home to an empty house looking for his dog, called the dog walker. The dog walker would have said, well, I brought him home. This guy would have been panicked.
Meanwhile, whatever the dumb neighbor was that left his door unlocked and then accused his wife of not being scared enough of murderers, whoever that guy is the real villain in this story. That's the neighbor that's the real dummy.
He's a jerk. And of course, his first things was, those boys, I told them to lock the door when they brought groceries in. And it was like, no, because then you left the house, because we retraced our steps. And sure enough, I was the one who had left. And so, I left the door unlocked. And so there was a dog sitting on the couch when my wife came home.
That's right. Those are the best moments as a parent, where you're like working yourself up into a lather. Like, you're like, who left the sink running? It was me. It was me. Oh, I left the sink running. Oh, God. Everyone go back to what you're doing. Daddy's an idiot. Daddy's an idiot.
Yep. And they all nod knowingly.
Yeah, exactly. That is funny, though. You're like, there is a murder in the house. And she's like, it's a dog. Hooray. There is a murderer in the house. Someone left this door unlocked. Well, there's going to be hell to pay for whoever left that door unlocked.
Yeah, no kidding.
Brad, this is a sign from the heavens that you are ready for a dog in your life.
Oh, I was so scared you were going to say that. Well, here's the kicker to the whole story. We found out the name of the dog.
Okay.
Ziggy. I swear to God, I'm not making that up. The dog's name was Ziggy.
Oh my God. And the dog turns to you with a Ziggy punchline, like dog hugs are God's way of hugging humanity.
He just I like the little sigh at the end. He just turns to the camera and says, "It's a living."
It's a living. I kind of feel like every Ziggy punchline needs to be finished by that. Well, that's the way I ordered the soup. Well, on that Ziggy note, it feels like we're starting every show with Ziggy accidentally. On that Ziggy note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a Ziggy living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, local LA chapter president of the Ziggy Fan Club and cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. But first, we have to thank and acknowledge our wonderful sponsors for this week. Week number 6 of 10 from the folks at Wacom over at wacom.com. And Brad, the one thing I want to talk to you about is, do you remember when you came out to the studio, the Wacom setup that I have, I can do both digital and hard copy, pen and ink analog. What am I trying to say? Analog sounds so weird when you say pen and ink.
Yeah, analog is weird, but and traditional is a little bit haughty, but I usually go with traditional.
Well, yeah, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up is someone was saying, hey, describe for me what your setup is. And since Wacom is our sponsor, I thought I might as well describe this for you. So I have a standing desk with a split level inclined part. And by split level, I mean half of the desk can tilt up or tilt down and the other half stays flat, right? So you can leave your coffee on it. And in that split level, I have a light box built into it. And then when I need to switch from drawing Sheldon analog to drive digitally on the Wacom, I lower the split level down to flat, and then I swing my Wacom over on the flex arm that they have. It's basically just like a, like an architectural light, Brad, the kind of things that would have springs. This is a super mega industrial version that can hold the 30 or 40 pound Wacom up. And so you can swivel it 90 degrees, you can swivel it 180 degrees, you can draw upside down, all that sort of stuff. And that's how I do my setup. Now, how do you have your setup in the studio digitally versus analog? Well, you don't draw analog anymore, do you?
I don't. I'm telling you, once I laid hands on a Cintiq, I never went back to ink. And as a matter of fact, somebody on Twitter was just saying this just recently. They said, don't you miss the smell of the ink or the feel of the way the pen spreads the ink across the paper? And I'm like, no. No, I said I never romanticized the process that much. What happened when I started drawing on a Cintiq and I went, oh my God, this is way better than the way I've been doing it before and quicker, and I was getting better results. And it was like, why I didn't miss ink in the slightest.
I like that you're like, there's two things that Brad Geiger doesn't do anymore. I don't draw on ink and I don't lock doors. Those are the two things that I don't do. You can't make me lock a door. I'm Brad Geiger. I'm Brad Geiger. Go ahead, break into my house. Go ahead.
You're going to make me so self-conscious now. I'll be like an OCD guy checking the door every 5 minutes here.
You're like falling asleep, got to sit up one more time, go check that lock. No, all right, never mind.
Yeah. Oh, do you do that? Like 1 o'clock in the morning, I'll wake up and all of a sudden the thought will come across my head and I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep. And I go through the house, top floor, down to the basement and back up, checking windows and doors and stuff like that. I think that's a dad thing. I know my wife has never done that.
Oh, yeah. It's weird because everyone else is asleep and I'm like, got to do one more round. And in the back of my mind, I'm always like, I don't want a cute dog to break in. This would be terrible.
Yeah, well, that's high on my list too. But I wanted to talk to you about that Wacom arm because did you get that through them or did you buy that through a third party? Because I was at your place using that swivel arm and I noticed something about it.
Okay, what did you notice?
Did Wacom build it or did third party build it?
Oh, Wacom built it, I'm assuming. Or at least they contracted out. I'm not sure. Why?
But you got that through them. I was so impressed with it, and I want to tell you why. I've got a really notoriously, artists call it a heavy hand, right? I bear down on my writing instrument. And I thought for sure that from every architectural lamp I've ever had, that lost its tension in the first day, and the lamp starts to droop down over your drawing board. I thought for sure after like a day of my drawing at your workstation that I'd have this thing beat up, that it would wilt under my hand because I do bear down pretty hard. That thing stood up to everything I threw at it. And was steady as a rock. I was mesmerized by how well that thing was built.
Yeah, it's really. It has one purpose and it does it really well, and that's to swivel and pivot your Wacom when you draw on it. So
yeah.
I love the idea that you draw in a bear down fashion because so far we're learning a lot about Brad Geiger today in this podcast. Step 1 is get out of the house. There's the murderer. Step 2 is I draw bearing down. I'm wondering if there's a connection between these two personality traits.
Yeah, you think somebody's a little bit type A, somebody's a little wound tight. I remember before I switched to the Cintiq, I used to use Pigma Micron pens an awful lot. You remember those marker pens? They've got archival.
I use them still, yeah.
The problem is they're expensive pens, and I would bear down so hard. I'd go through them like a week and a half. I'd have that nib mashed down to nothing.
So everybody, I want you to know that Brad Geiger draws with joy, lighthearted joy in his heart with that pen. That's what you need to know.
Yeah, you've heard of a white-knuckle driver. I'm a white-knuckle drawer.
I'm going to make people laugh. They are going to enjoy this comic. Let's jump into our first $5 question, Brad.
I was going to say, I don't know whether you did that on purpose, but it's a brilliant transition into making people laugh.
Oh, that's true. Okay, because our first $5 question comes in from Patreon backer Chris Bays, and Chris asks, "Hey, Brad and Dave, if you found that your funny just isn't as funny as it used to be, how do you get that back?" So, Brad Geiger, I turn the question to you. If you have found that your humor, your funny, your sense of joie de vivre is not quite up to the level that you've come to expect, how do you get that back, Brad?
I got 3 thoughts for you here.
Okay.
Because this is something that I really grapple with. Because humor is tough. Humor is really, really tough. And you never really know if you've written something funny until like 10 years later. Like I've been posting my Greystone Inn archives that I did back in 2000 and between 2000 and 2005. And I've been rerunning those archives on Instagram and now Twitter. And I can finally tell the ones that are funny because the stuff is so old to me. I forgot the punchline and the setup, and I'm reading it literally for the first time.
Yeah, no, so you're right. You're right.
I can see the mistakes that I made that I couldn't see before. And I could see, okay, that was pretty close. That was funny. That one, not so much. You can finally judge yourself, but 10 years later, it's way too late. So I've got a few thoughts for you that I try to use myself. The first one is number one, take more time. I always talk about letting humor ferment. And again, it comes back to the idea of adding the element of time, maybe not 10 years, but time. In other words, write that punchline and then let it sit. Let your subconscious work on it. Don't go back to it. Don't even look at it. Don't even read it. Come back a day, maybe a week later. And to do this, by the way, you've got to have a lot of comics kind of written that you can ferment and kind of, you can't say, okay, I'm going to draw one thing and then a week later you're still working on it. But if you can let a few of these ideas ferment and then come back to it a week or so later at the optimum where you're completely unfamiliar, not completely, but you can look at it in the cold light of day.
Right.
And then you can judge it. And then you're a little bit more, you're more objective. You can look at it with a little bit less passion. And also, here's what happens. I don't know whether this is true to you, Dave, but it's so true to me. When I write something that's a little bit of funny, like you think about funny being a fire. And sometimes I'll write something, and at the end of that sentence, I found a spark. And I'm so overjoyed that I found a spark that I get excited. It's like, there it is. There's the spark. There, it's going to be a fire, but it's a spark. And then I'm just happy with a spark, and I'm so happy with the spark that I never go back and kindle it. Right? You never go back and make it into a fire. That's what happens so many times. We're so happy that we even got a spark that we forget to kindle it into a fire.
Yeah.
So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that sounds like Brad's high school dating career, actually. Yeah.
Oh, God. A lot of sparks there. Very few fires. But that's number one.
It's like the end of a Ziggy punchline.
I had a lot of sparks, not too many fires. So that's my first thought, and so I've got a couple more, but I want to hear what you have to say. So what do you have to say to this poor struggling humorist?
Well, first of all, I think Brad's right. I think Brad's smart because what you do when you add time in is that you, when you're trying to edit and move around a joke as you're writing it, you're in creative mode, right? You're in an actively pushing out mode. But when you give it time and you read it again, even if it's the next day, but ideally the next week, the next month, 6 months down the road, the mode that you're in there is in receiving mode, right? And so you are seeing it in a completely different way. Even if your mind remembers the rough outlines of what it is, you're receiving it and you're seeing how it clicks as it's being presented to you. And with time, you immediately go, oh, this whole sentence was unnecessary. Oh, this word, the better choice is this one. And time gives you that ability. So Brad's right about that. But I want to focus on a different way to help Chris find his humor again. And that's this. Is that when you are feeling unfunny, usually what that means is that your muscle, for lack of a better phrase, isn't being flexed enough, your humor muscle. And so there's a couple things that you can do. Now, if you walk a fairly solitary path in life, just watching a lot of comedy specials can help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reading your favorite humorists. For me, it's Dave Barry. He makes me laugh like nobody else. Or even like a quick couple pages of Far Side will make me laugh and remind me of just different ways of setting up jokes. But watching stand-up comedy specials or comedians in cars getting coffee or something like that.
Yes.
Where you just watch people the back and forth. But honest to God, the single best way that you can find humor is hang out with your funniest friends for a couple of hours. Ideally in a relaxed situation where you're all having fun. Something like, I don't know if bowling is the right example, but some event.
Bowling.
Yeah,
not something where I've got to wear somebody else's shoes.
We're learning a lot about how Brad has fun in the world. This is great. Anyway, what I'm getting at though is that like some group of friends where you're doing some event where everybody has their guard down and you're relaxed and you're having fun and the focus is on doing the thing. It doesn't matter if you're playing volleyball, going canoeing, going fishing, watching a sporting event, but wherever you're joking around together, and conversation has to be king there, and it fires up all sorts of synapses around humor. Because if you're too alone and you become too much with yourself, and that's why you lose your funny, because you're not. I mean, even watching comedy specials or reading humorists is not the same as actively trying to make another human being laugh in person, physically.
You're in your bubble.
Yeah, you're in your bubble. It's a great way to say it. So honestly, the best way to break out of it is take a week or two of just like call up a friend and be like, hey, let's go grab a beer, or hey, let's go to lunch, or hey, let's hang out. Come on over to my house and we're all going to play Settlers of Catan or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is.
Settlers of Catan. Not something where I've got to wear somebody else's shoes.
I'm Brad Guigar. I don't like to laugh. Someone's murdering my family because I left the door unlocked. I'm Brad Guigar. Anyway, so what are your thoughts on that, Brad? Any closeout thoughts for Chris on that?
I love that. Especially going back to your humor touchstones. And for me, it's watching Mel Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Mel Brooks is amazing.
Yes. Well, and that was my number 2 point was always remember that it's okay. Sometimes we're trying so hard to be funny that we forget it's okay to be silly. Right? We try to come up with this big, intelligent, well-crafted joke. And sometimes just seltzer down the pants is what it calls for, right? Sometimes stepping on a banana peel is the answer. And sometimes it's okay to be silly. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Mel Brooks is an excellent example of that. He'll do really, really top-level parody. And in the next scene, do something that's just dumb.
Yeah, just straight up dumb. Yeah, but delightfully dumb. In the way that a 10-year-old rocking out dancing is delightfully dumb. It's just fun to see.
He's joyful. He's joyful in his silliness.
Yeah. And the reason I say dancing is it's like that dance like no one's looking kind of thing. Mel Brooks kind of has what are you gonna do? You're not gonna laugh? This is funny. Who cares? You judging me?
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you remove your high-minded editorial hat, you find that just silly, goofy stuff is the best way to go.
It's
I would agree
okay
with
to
that.
be silly. Yes. Yeah. And my third point is this, and this I'm telling you is tried and true because it goes back to the idea of the spark and what I've seen through doing consultations and webcomics.com and just people pulling me aside and saying, okay, help me get through this. What I see time and time again, and by the way, in my own stuff constantly, is that you stop too soon. You're so excited about the spark, again, that you forget about the fire. And the idea of stopping too soon is, I would be willing to bet 80% of the missed jokes or the jokes that don't hit that I've seen are you stop too soon. And so my remedy for that is the one more panel method. In other words, I'll tell the person, all right, you got a good place there. What happens in the next panel? And they'll be like, well, what do you mean? I'm at the last panel. I said, no. You add one more panel. What happens next? What happens where you push that concept, you exaggerate it, you engage in hyperbole, you explode it even bigger? What happens in the next panel? And the idea is not to turn a 4-panel comic into a 5-panel comic. The idea is to push that concept to a broader, a funnier, a more explosive place, and then go back and edit it so it's tight. So now your setup is leading right to that 5th panel, and you're taking a bunch of stuff out because now you found where the real funny is. That one more panel method, I'm telling you, I've seen it work so many times where the question is, what happens next?
Yep.
And then when they decide what happens next, guess what? They found the funny. Now they can rewrite that so the setup leads right to the funnier place, and they've got a really tight joke.
Yeah. And I want to end this off by, first of all, I echo Brad's point right there, but I want to finish this off here with saying one last thing, Chris, which is I read back through my archives of Sheldon, especially because it's more joke-driven and gag-driven, and I can see ebbs and flows of like a 6-month period where I was firing on all pistons. I swear to God, Chris, it's like the best stuff I've ever done. And then you keep reading through the archives and you're like, oh, these 3 months are a little rough. Yikes, what happened? And then back on again. Like the next 3 months are amazing. You're like, wow, look at this. I was back. Wow, geez, this joke is great. This joke is great. Oh, wow, this page is fantastic. And so I just want you to be kind to yourself that sometimes there's going to be ebbs and flows in your creativity and in your humor, and that's okay. But I think these methods that Brad and I have tried over the years will help. And so I think we will leave it there. Brad, what do you think? Should we jump to the next question?
Yes, that's a great place to jump.
Alrighty. So let me jump into Michael Sweater's question. And Michael, I hope it's Sweater. If not, it might be Sweeter. And I apologize if I got that wrong. Michael asks, hey, first time, long time. How do you guys feel about having a folder of reusable backgrounds? I recently started storyboarding for a show, and along with the episode outlines, we get a giant folder of backgrounds that have been drawn in a previously used location. A lot of the times, if a scene is more focused on character action or dialogue, there isn't even a practical reason to draw a new background, though they encourage us to make new ones if it would be more interesting. Do you guys ever do this? Would I keep these in the asset folder Brad keeps talking about? Thanks so much. Brad, jump in on this one first. What do you think? Reusable backgrounds, go.
The short answer is yes, 1,000 times yes. But there's something really interesting about the psychology behind why he feels the need to ask that question in the first place.
Okay.
Right?
What do you mean?
As cartoonists, we've all got, I don't know how else to put it other than it's a weird form of machismo that isn't gender linked. In other words, it's kind of like, if I don't draw this whole thing, then I'm not a real cartoonist. And if I use a background that is from something that I drew earlier, then I'm somehow less of a real cartoonist. The answer is, listen, our jobs as comics artists is to make something that resonates with an audience. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Now, my personal preference is, like, for example, I always dislike seeing a photo used for a background because I don't think that's a good look in many cases. But especially if it's your own art that you're using, that you're reusing, like a background that you drew and now you're going to bring it in, or something like Michael's talking about. Everybody's hitting that studio style, so that the style of the drawing really doesn't matter anyway. But I guess my point is, why wouldn't you use that? Especially if it gives you the ability to make that illustration look that much better, more polished and professional, and B, it gives you those results quicker so that you can get on to the next thing.
Right.
Why wouldn't you? And yes, in Clip Studio, there's an asset folder, and I keep all of my backgrounds. Because I detest drawing backgrounds. We've talked about this before. You love it. I hate it. So if I'm drawing a background, I will draw that background, and I will draw it in a completely separate layer, draw the whole thing, so I just have to draw it once, and then boom, that I've got a kitchen now. And now anytime I need a kitchen, I've got 1 or 2 kitchens I can pull from, so I don't have to draw that freaking refrigerator again. The only thing I've got to tell you to look out for is sometimes there is the very human ability to get lazy, and you end up using a kitchen background that's completely the wrong perspective for the scene that you're doing, or you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole, and you just got to say, you know what, doggone it, this isn't working. I'm just going to have to draw another kitchen. and then put that into your asset folder. So you've got that for next time. But yeah, I would, in fact, when I brought Asia in for her summer internship, that was the main thing she was going to do for me is just, I gave her a list of different backgrounds I wanted drawn. And I said, I want you to come as close as you can to my style. We talked about some touchstones for making it look like that. And that was how she spent the first part of the summer until we started coming up with other things that were exciting too. And we went off and followed those. But yeah, 1,000 times yes. Build backgrounds, build a folder of backgrounds. Don't think twice about using a background you've already drawn. What do you think,
I think
Dave?
that's a smart idea, especially if you've gone through the trouble of drawing a whole big, beautiful background. Why not save it, right? Like, I don't know if I would recommend generating a bunch of backgrounds, but by all means, save the backgrounds that you've drawn. So I will at least echo that. I don't know personally if I would recommend spending the time drawing a bunch of backgrounds so that you're ready to go, because that feels like packing a bunch of camping equipment for a trip you might never go on, you know?
Yeah, you've got a point.
But I will say, anytime you generate one, why not save it, right? Like, save that. But I don't know that I'm...
Right.
Because basically, for me, in my mind, my immediate thought was like, it feels like you're running in place if you're creating a bunch of backgrounds. Oh, Brad, look at all these backgrounds. I got 48 backgrounds. I'm ready to go. Oh, how many pages have you produced? Well,
listen, to be clear, I wasn't drawing those.
No,
my intern was drawing those.
You took that very personally. I was not accusing you.
I did. I did.
I'm just saying, listen, you should lock your door. That's what I'm saying. That if we're going to be honest about what I am criticizing you for, it's that your family safety, Brad, requires you locking your door. It's a very simple thing.
Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight.
One thing I will say, and Michael probably knows this from his animation background, though, is that very often you have to either shimmy over characters or the background so that there's not weird synergies or misalignments in background to tangencies. Yeah, exactly. So you don't have weird things flowing from backward to foreground and foreground to background, that kind of thing. So one thing that I'm hesitant about saying, have a bunch of pre-prepared backgrounds, is that you could have this whole beautiful background prepared, and to Brad's point, the refrigerator that you beautifully worked on once, thinking I'll never have to draw a refrigerator again, might end up having a tangency with a character that you have in the foreground. You're like, well, dang it, why did I spend so much time on that fridge? So what I like to do is kind of have free-floating objects that I can either redraw, trace, or just grab wholesale and move around. So it's a little bit different than having a set background. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've got objects that you can put in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Objects, yeah. And then there's also, for me at least, I tend to draw kind of black box theater, and I know Brad loves to make fun of that whenever I say black box theater, but that idea where like the dialogue and the characters are doing the work, there's not a lot of scenery, you know? And so for me, just one or two objects or the hint of a wall or something or a bit of ship in the background for Drive, that's enough to let you know we are now on the ship, or we are on a planet, or we are by a pond, or, you know, just a few things that let you know. Because comics by and large are the art not only of the possible, but the art of reduction, not the art of addition, you know? Yes, there are artists like Mobius or Watterson that add in a bunch of detail that make it beautiful. But for the most part, comics also really work well with reduction. So don't add in too much. Anyway, that's my thought on that. Brad, any last thoughts for you on backgrounds?
Oh, I think you buttoned it up perfectly. That's
well, I tell you what, the one thing we didn't button up perfectly was that downstairs lock, did we? We didn't button that one up at all, did we?
Oh, no, I didn't at all.
No, I forgot to lock the door.
Opportunity came knocking, but I had the door locked that time. Meh.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we'll tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Oh, when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
and exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, no worries.
You can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Leave us a 5-star and a few kind words.
That, and along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, let's talk comics. All right, Brad, this next question comes in to both of us and says, "Hey guys, I'm a comic creator that has a speech impediment, which makes it difficult and awkward to pitch my work or network in person. Have you encountered other creators with this problem? Or, as someone without an impediment, do you think there's anything I can do to make it less awkward when starting a conversation? Some extra content that doesn't need to be in the show necessarily. My impediment is the type that makes me pause for several seconds at a time because my voice freezes up. It's a physical thing, not a mental thing. It's often interpreted as there being something wrong, that I'm more nervous than I am, that I'm not very smart, or that I'm not to be taken seriously. I'm just not sure what I can do to make people feel more comfortable or treat me like they're conversing with a normal person." Brad, this is a great question. Do you want to jump in on this one first?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one first. First of all, it's easy. Well, listen, it's easy for me to say, well, don't let that bother you, you little scamp, and tell this person to go on and have a good time and not to worry about things quite so much. The only problem is, just speaking from my own personal experience, we're sitting here in the studio the other day, and Asia is doing one of the ComicLab animations, and she starts laughing, and I go, what are you laughing about? And she says, the hardest part about this job is figuring out how to animate your stutter. and it'd be easy for me to tell this person, well, just get out there and have a good time. Don't worry about it. Except I know how self-conscious I am about the little itty bitty stutter that I've got. If you go back, I don't know whether we've ever talked about this. Before we brought Matt aboard, I was doing the audio quote unquote engineering, and I would go through and I would eliminate all of my stutters because I was so embarrassed. Oh,
did you really?
Dave, it would take me an entire day and a half.
Oh, Brad,
to do a ComicLab episode.
I gotta tell you, I feel terrible that happened because A, I didn't know you did that, but also I find your stutter to be delightful and part of your. No, I mean we all have the thing that makes us us, and I feel bad for past Brad that you did that. And I'm saying this sincerely, no joking involved. I feel terrible that you went through all that trouble because that is a unique and wonderful part of you.
I appreciate that, but it was a decision that I made. It was a decision I made myself. But here's what I'm saying. What I'm about to tell this person is to not let it bother her. Except I know that you can't not let something like that bother you, especially something like this where, so she's talking and all of a sudden her voice freezes up and then it's like, oh, did I say something wrong to you? Or are you too stupid to, carry on a conversation? All these things are going through her head, right? And it's like, and by the way, I know who this person is. We didn't name them. It might not even be a her. I could just be throwing you. You don't know. But I know this person, and I know them to be very, very intelligent. So so that's even more of a, frustration. So you can't just say, "Well, don't let it bother you." So I want to spitball a few things. And how about this? What if you had like a business card thing made up, so that when you're talking to somebody, you can hand them this card. And I've thought about doing this myself. I'll tell you why in a minute. You can hand them a card and it says, okay, here's the deal. If you notice this thing happening, here's what it's called. Here's what's happening. Doesn't mean that you've offended me. It doesn't mean that I'm having a hard time keeping up. It's just this thing, and that thing is a thing. What I think you will find is comic conventions, in my experience, have overwhelmingly been accepting from all kinds of different people. You see a lot of different people with all kinds of different stuff going on in their lives, all kinds of walks, all kinds of journeys, and they're all overwhelmingly pretty well accepted at a comic convention. So you're among friends, you're among family, if you will. I don't think anyone's going to hold that against you, and then they might even kind of look at you in a different light. And I've had the same thought, because at this point, Dave, my hearing in my left ear is so bad. I've just been thinking, and even the hearing aid doesn't really touch it if there's background noise. I've been thinking about getting a little card that says, "Listen, if you see me cocking my head to one side like the RCA dog, it doesn't mean that that you've said something that I'm absolutely astounded over. It just means I'm trying to angle my good ear in your direction."
Yeah.
I've thought about this myself. So I'm asking you, Dave Kellett, what if she had, or he, you don't know, I could be tricking you. What if this person had business cards made up and handed them out as they're talking at a comic convention?
Well, first of all, I got to say, Brad's doing a wonderful job of dropping the gender ball every 2 seconds here. I mean, what about for her? Well, I mean, could be him. Could be him. I mean, I don't know. Who can say? You can just see Brad going, "Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit!"
I know. I did it over and over again. It's like I did it the first time, and I'm like,
like 4 times in a row, Brad.
I think I did it once. I don't think they noticed it.
I mean, when answering her question, I mean, it could be, you don't know. None of us know. Who could ever say? It's a mystery to the world.
All of a sudden, I turn into Basil Fawlty,
Yeah.
Don't mention the Germans. I did it once. I think I got away with it.
It's like someone's passed you a Ming Chinese vase and you're going, juggling it around. Anyway, so I want to say good work on that front. I also want to say this. I want to come at this from a completely different angle than what Brad did, which is I want to come at it from a silver lining perspective, which is that in the 10,000 years of humans drawing art, you have been born into a unique age where the bulk of your business networking, not necessarily your face-to-face networking, but business networking, can be done without ever having to physically talk to someone. Now, I know that's a kind of a shitty answer in the sense that, like, you're like, okay, that doesn't solve the problem. But I have hired and dealt with artists that I have never met before that spoke an entirely different language. And we did all the business online, and I have no idea what they look like. I have no idea what they sound like. I have no idea how tall or short they are. It doesn't matter, because frankly, the only thing that mattered in that moment was how good was their art. Did their art work? Did it sing? And so what I'm getting at here is that I know artists, and Brad knows them too, who they are perhaps some of the best artists that have worked in the 20th century that have crippling anxiety, social anxiety. And I mean crippling social anxiety. And it is like asking someone to walk through fire to ask them to go out and do stuff in public, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're not one of the best artists of the 20th century. That doesn't mean that I don't look up to them. That doesn't mean that I don't think they're great people. I'm just, and what's great about this, why I bring it up, is they have been able to build a career because we are living in a world where most of your communication as an artist, 99.999% of it is in the comics themselves, right? So that's the great news. And then the other 0.1% can be done through email, messaging, forums, chat, text, all that sort of stuff, right? Like Brad, you and I, we do 90% of our communication through texting, and then 10% of the time we'll call each other. But what I'm getting at is the silver lining that maybe is dodging the question, but I don't think so, is that you can still build an incredible career and never have to go to a comics convention, never have to network with any other cartoonist in the physical world, and never having to go to a book signing. You can do all of that kind of stuff from the comfort. And it's kind of one of the beautiful things about this career. And so I will turn this personal for a second. And just to say that I like the fact that most of the world doesn't need to know who I am. Yeah. And in fact, for whatever reason on Instagram, I don't know why, I haven't been posting photos of myself or videos of myself as much as I've done on Twitter. And so on the rare occasions where I've posted a photo or a video, people are like, whoa, yikes, did not expect you to look like that. Ha! Who? And,
How about that person that thought that I was you and you were me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a Patreon backer that we posted a photo of Brad and I, and they're like, oh, I thought Brad was Dave and Dave was Brad. Because, and what I'm getting at there is, and this is a way of comforting you as it does sometimes comfort me, is that no one needs to know what we look like. No one needs to know who we are or what we do. Who cares? It's the art. The art is what we're putting out into the world. And then your friends and family, who are all very familiar with the journey that you're on, they'll communicate with you in the physical world fine. And who cares if you never have to communicate with a reader or another cartoonist in the real world, right, Brad? I mean, so that's one way of looking at this, is that in 1950, you never could have sold to New York editors without physically walking into a New York editor office, right?
Right.
You couldn't have sold to the New Yorker, you couldn't have sold to Playboy, you couldn't have sold to any of those magazines in the 50s without physically walking in on a Tuesday morning to those editors. Guess what? I never have to see a New York editor if I don't want to, if I want to submit to the New Yorker. I can just email PDFs all day long, right? I can just send work all day long. And that's kind of an amazing part about the world we live in now versus even 30 years ago. So that's a silver lining. And then, Brad, what was your other point? Having a card made up? That was...
Yeah, well, or having some way of communicating this situation that takes the mystery out of it. So, because I zeroed in on this deal where this person, they said, my voice freezes up. It doesn't mean that I'm stupid. It doesn't mean that you've offended me, and it's like the big problem to me is the question mark that hangs in the air when the conversation is momentarily interrupted. And if you can explain that interruption, it takes a lot of the weirdness out of the situation. It's like, okay, I know what's going on here, and maybe I'm sure there's a name for whatever it is. Okay, so this is blah blah blah, and then you can move forward with the mystery taken out of the air.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But I think another way to approach this too is to suggest to this person, and it's kind of a version of what we've talked about before, is that no one is as harsh a critic as you are for the most part, right?
Oh, yeah.
And here's what I mean by that. Comic conventions, as Brad intimated, tend to attract a beautiful, wide swath of walks
weirdos.
of life. No, I mean, like...
we're all weirdos showing up there. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but we all fall into that category for different reasons.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm getting at, too, is that for whatever reason, at Comic-Cons, I have noticed that I have a fairly large deaf audience that reads Sheldon and Drive. And I think part of that is if you are deaf, comics are an amazing art form, right? It's like it's kind of everything you could want in an art form right there for you. But when I meet those readers at Comic-Con, and I'm leading up to something, is that for the first split second of the conversation, you go, because someone who's speaking but that is tonally deaf, there's a unique quality about the voice when they start speaking, right, Brad? And for the first split second, you go, your brain goes, I see what's happening, and then you lock into it, right? And what I'm getting at is, in huge kindness and friendship, nothing ever needs to be said. I know exactly what's happening, and within 10 seconds, I go, I've got it. We'll figure out a way to communicate with each other. No worries.
Right.
And so what I'm getting at is, I'm sure that the majority of your conversations, yes, there will absolutely be jerks in the world, but the majority of your conversations, once that first 10 seconds has gotten past, I'm sure they will go much better than in your mind, you're imagining the worst case scenario,
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
I think, that's, again, this is easy for me to say because I have never had a speech impediment like this before. So, in a lot of ways, this is unfair for me to comment on it. But what I'm saying is 90% of people in comics are super kind and generous and welcoming. And I think you will find that if you can get past that first hurdle, most conversations will go great, probably far better than you anticipate.
Right.
But again, easy for me to say. So,
well, meanwhile, if you come up with yet another way to address this, or if you've used a combination of all the advice that we've kind of offered, let us know how it worked out. We'd love a follow-up.
Yeah, and I will open this up to other patrons because there is a really lovely community at patreon.com/ComicLab and on the Discord server. And if anyone has other advice, by all means, we can circle back around on this question because I want to offer the best and completest answer that we can for this. So if you have if you yourself have overcome different tribulations in terms of person-to-person selling or talking or networking, then by all means share some of the suggestions that you might have, and we'll pass along the best ones. Don't you think, Brad?
That sounds like a great idea. So, Dave, we've got time for yet another question. Do you want to hear this one?
Let's hear it.
This comes in from Alexander Loken, who writes, Dear Brad and Dave, self-publishing comics have in the recent years become more accepted, thanks to trailblazers like you guys. But other forms of self-publishing, like novels and children's books, are maybe viewed as less professional works of art. Maybe because of the lack of professional editing that a publisher provides. Do you think this will change in the future? And if so, how? Dave talked about writing a children's book in an earlier episode, so perhaps you have some thoughts. Thanks for being funny and informative. And that comes from our friend in Norway, Dave. Norway.
In Norway, is that our first question? Our first question asker from Norway, Brad.
Perhaps. So what do you have in terms of thoughts on this? In terms of independent publishing in novels and children's books, and I would throw sci-fi novels in there, perhaps as well. What do you think?
You're throwing sci-fi in there just to twist the knife, aren't you?
No, because I've heard the same thing of sci-fi.
Well, I do want to work in sci-fi, so maybe we should talk about it. All right, so I want to work in sci-fi. All right,
there's somebody knocking at my studio door. Okay.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
So what's your advice for Alexander?
By the way, they don't even need to knock. You leave your doors unlocked. She can just walk right in.
You win. You win best callback of the year. Right there. Good Lord.
You just hear the door open. All right. So here's the thing about novels, children's books, and sci-fi, which also fall under broadly novels, is that there's a couple of things that have made webcomics work in a self-publishing system. Suddenly I became Dutch. I don't know what happened. Anyway, here's what we do. I share Sheldon for free. I share Drive for free. People can dive in for free on a bunch of different formats, Twitter, Instagram, on the website, on a bunch of RSS feeds, and they can read as much or as little as they want. They love it. Oh, they share it. They pass it around. The audience grows. Bada bing, bada boom, bada boom. And then every 6 to 12 months, I go, hey, gang, we're gathering all those comics that were free that you loved into a high-res, beautifully printed, well-quality made book. Here you go. It's going to be bitty batty boom dollars, and would you like it? Right. So that's in a nutshell. That's our publishing model, right? But I can imagine that it would work with a novel that's written kind of Charles Dickens style or Arthur Conan Doyle style, where you do it as a series. Like, oh, will Sherlock Holmes survive the fall? Tune in next week, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Chapter by chapter is what I'm getting at. But it is harder for people online to read text at length and coming back and back and back to it, So there's a reason why novels have not really taken off as a self-publishing model online. And so there's that, right? So I don't think novels and sci-fi it's harder to get people to dive in and share. Like, for example, Brad, if I'm 20 chapters in on a book, what makes that chapter shareable for Brad Guigar? Be like, Brad, you got to check out chapter 20. Oh my God, it's amazing. But if there's a standalone Sheldon or even maybe a Drive, someone can share that on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, right? And so it gets passed around. The audience grows. It has a nice viral effect. But long form text doesn't have that. And then the second one is children's book. And this is the hardest nut to crack, and I think it's frankly going to be tricky for me to make my Kickstarter children's book work online, but I'm going to try it anyway just because I want to do it, is that for the most part, and I'm a parent myself, you want to hold a children's book first to see what it looks like, feels like, smells like, all the aspects, and you want to physically gift it to a kid. And because most kids, well-parented kids, aren't going to just be given free access to the internet. They're not just going to go find a Raina book PDF that they can, Raina Telgemeier book that they can just, check out for free and then go buy it. They're going to be given the book by a parent, usually at a Scholastic book fair, that kind of thing. And so it's a very different market for kids. Kids are unique and still hard to get to online because they shouldn't be easy to get to online, So that's my short version answer. Brad, what are your short version answers of why novels and sci-fi, to your point, and children's books are harder to self-publish?
I think it's all a false premise. I disagree with almost everything you said.
Oh, no. Oh, no. All right. This is Mommy and Daddy are fighting. Let's see what happens.
Children's books, I agree 100%. And we've talked about that at length. And it goes a lot to getting the books to the intended audience. And that's tougher. If I was doing a children's book, I would definitely be trying to hook up with Scholastic or a children's lit publisher like that. Children's book, because of the nature of the distribution and publishing system, I think that is still very strongly in the hands of publishers. Everything else I disagree with, and it's because recently I was looking for something to read, and oh my God, this is a whole conversation, Dave. You're going to hate me so much. I've been trying to be a better reader, except I don't have time to read, except for that time that I've got driving between my house and the studio, which is about a half-hour drive, and so I've been getting into audiobooks. And so I've been wanting to read audiobooks and consume more writing through doing that. And the first one was Dune.
Okay.
And I made it about halfway through, and I could not make it another word. I get it. It's hot out. Holy crap. And I know it's one of your favorite books of all time. I've been meaning to have this conversation.
Brad, I've been meaning to have this conversation. Brad,
I feel so bad about it.
Listen,
I feel so bad.
As a non-judgmental friend, I got to tell you, the fact that you don't like Dune is fine. The friendship is absolutely over, but it's fine that you don't like it. I never want to talk to you again, but it's fine that you don't like it.
I felt the same way when I found out you've never watched The Godfather, so we're even. No, but
we're even.
I had a hard time getting through. I couldn't. I'm still halfway through Dune, and I started looking for other books, and I'm like, okay, humor. I want to read humor, and so I looked up, some of the funniest books ever written, and I found this one, Confederacy of Dunces. Have you ever heard about this book?
Oh, yeah. It's from the 70s, right?
Yeah. Actually, a great story behind the book. It was published after the author committed suicide, and his mom went publisher to publisher doggedly until somebody agreed to read it. And then they realized, or in the words of this editor, they had found the funniest book ever written. Horrible. Not laugh one, and more than a little racist, but that, of its time stuff
what
aside.
What a ringing endorsement. Not funny and kind of racist. I can't recommend this one at all.
It's horrible. So
but as a story, though, that you're basically saying you're trying to dip a toe into audiobooks is what you're saying, right?
The long way around saying I'm trying to be a better read. I'm trying to improve my writing through reading. And
well, can I suggest something?
Yeah, well, you can.
Have you tried, and this is going to sound crazy, have you tried reading?
Yeah, it puts me right to sleep. I'm telling you, I get 3 pages in and my eyes get tired and I go right out.
Grandpa has a hard time once he gets those shoes off staying awake. Oh boy.
Goodness. No, I've got terrible reading habits. I've got a stack of books by my bedside that I've tried to get through, and it's like they put me right to sleep. Thank God audiobooks don't do that, or else I'd be, careening off the road on I-95. But so my wife is like, I'm going to make a suggestion. You're going to roll your eyes, but I'm going to make a suggestion. And I said, what? She says, romance. And I go, really? She says, well, yeah. First of all, there's some really, there's some really solid writing, really good stories, and it's compelling. And she goes, you're going to like it. I go, really? Romance novels? I'm going to be listening to romance novels? She said, she starts setting me up. I got Audible from Amazon. That's how I got those other ones that I didn't finish. And I bought a subscription to the romance package. She's voracious with these. Well, her husband snores so loudly that she's got to sleep with headphones on.
Oh boy.
So she'll put these audiobooks on at night and then, just fall asleep and then find where she left off and pick up from there. But she goes through these audiobooks, a dozen at a time, right? So, and also actual reading, but audiobooks in there as well. I got to say that because she listens to the show, and I know I'm gonna have to answer for a lot of this stuff. But anyway, she says romance. And she sets me up with this stuff. One of them's got the werewolves in it. The other one's got dragons, and it's got so all kinds of really cool. Like, I'm not going to read like Gone with the Wind. It's not going to keep my attention. But if Gone with the Wind had Draculas in it, I'd be reading the hell out of that.
I love it. I love it when you call vampires Draculas. It's my favorite. It's chef kiss. It's so good. Oh, I gotta tell you, it's got a lot of them Draculas in it. Oh boy, them Draculas come out there biting everybody's neck. Oh, I love me a Dracula story.
Do you remember Calgary Comics Expo when there was a bunch of people from Twilight there or something, and this young tween girl comes up to our table, and she says she's trying to find where these actors are, and I said, "Oh, you mean the one with all the Draculas? I think they're over there." And the other, and when I said the one with all the Draculas, the look on her face, it was like I had snails crawling out of my nose. It was wonderful.
Oh, I love it. Oh yeah, you're looking for the Draculas. Yeah, they're down that way. Yeah. Oh yeah, the sparkly Draculas. They're down that way. You're gonna want to go down 2 rows, take a left.
But here's the thing. Here I want to build to my climax here, if you'll excuse the expression. I started listening to these books. Some of the best freaking writing I've read in ages. Had me on the seat of my had me on the edge of my seat. It had me from the seat of my pants. I had all kinds of seats, and it was really, really good writing. And I'm very new to this world, so I'm sure some of them have publishers, but I think some of them may have found their roots in fanfic. I think some of them are independents. I don't think that publishing is where we all kind of assume it is, because there's a whole world out there that we're not familiar with, and I count me among them. That has a lot broader choices than we think they do.
Oh, absolutely. That's true. And listen, as much as I was joking before about have you tried reading a book, but I want to tell you a story because you know how very often at a party people will be like, and what do you do? And we say, oh, I'm a cartoonist. Oh, what newspaper are you in? You say, oh, no newspaper, is just entirely online.
Yeah.
And they go, how do you make a living? And then you give them the 5-minute pitch on how we make a living. And they go, that's amazing. Anyway, have a good party. I'm an accountant. Bye. Well, I was at a party, this was maybe 3-4 years ago, and Gloria and I started talking to an older actress, and she's like, I don't know how it came up. She's like, well, I'm building a whole sound studio in my house. And we're like, what? Why would you do that? And she goes, I have found tremendous late career success in reading audiobooks for independent authors. So authors, rather than going to a publisher, will hire their own voice talent and their own editor, and they'll put together their own audiobooks. And I was like, I got to tell you, as a web cartoonist, I was like, this is great. This is amazing. This is exactly what authors should be doing, taking control and ownership of their own career. And so that little snippet of conversation, I 100% believe you that there's not only a massive, massive audience for audiobooks, clearly there is, but also that the romance novels have entire subgenres that you and I would find fantastic. Because I know there's like 8 different types or 10 different types of romance novels, right? There's everything from historical ones to D&D type romance ones like you found. Shifters. You got because it's not evidently, Dave. It's not just werewolves. You've got weird badgers. You've got weird dogs. Weird. Now, can I ask you a question, Brad? Because I've never read quote unquote romance novels, and I've always curious to ask this: how much of this, by percentage, is about boning?
Oh my God. Why do you think it's keeping my attention? Okay, well, I've got an actual answer for you. Like, is it literally like,
ding dong, you ordered a pizza. All right, we're back into it. Like, what does a romance novel do? Like, what's the average romance novel?
So the first one I read was a shifter romance, and there was an awful lot of sex balanced out by a pretty good story, okay? which was fantastic. I thought, hey, this is great. And I'm telling you, they were really well-written scenes. What am I going to tell you? What am I? I'm going to pretend I'm somebody else? So the second one... The second one I read was just the opposite. It was a really good story, and there was a long, smoldering build-up to the actual physical relationship. And then, like 3/4 of the way through, then finally that came into play, and then there was a few sex scenes after that. But the story was really solid.
And then just ended on a Ziggy punchline.
Well, I told you I was here for the night.
I'll take my coffee to go, please.
I said, would your dress look better on the nightstand or something? That's a Ziggy pickup line. But here's how this all relates back, and I'm sure my wife will point out if I'm right or wrong. I think a lot of these people I'm reading are independents.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, and it's not just audiobooks. They release them in both formats. But here's the thing: I think the independent scene in novels is way more robust than we are assuming it is. There's the sentence I was looking for. It's there's a lot more going on in novels independently than we're giving it credit for. And I think that there's some authors that are finding really good success.
Well, let me circle back around to Alexander's question, because one thing he said is that maybe they are being done. He's saying the self-publishing like novels and children's books are maybe viewed as less professional works of art. So that's the part I want to address, because
I think even who's viewing that?
Oh, no, thanks for letting me finish my sentence. Great. You go ahead.
I got nothing.
No. This is important. Brad's got to barge in on this. Hold on.
I've got a thought. It's not like I haven't been talking for the last 20 minutes as you went, right, romance, really? Is that, or shifters? Oh.
You just barged into the room like that Muppet going, I want to go to Hollywood.
Okay, go ahead. I'll sit patiently while you say the wrong things.
Here's my thought for Alexander's. To Brad's point, that the fact that people are making an independent living, both in novels and in audiobooks. And I frankly, now that we're talking about it, I've read many an article about people that are going just through Amazon's system and selling a ton of books on a very specific, either a niche or a type of writing that doesn't get publisher attention, and yet found tremendous success with an audience directly, no publisher involved, right? So we all know that that's possible. But here's the thing, is that to Alexander's second question, is that they're viewed as a less professional form of art. I think one way to approach that, whether it's the children's book I'm about to do, or whether if it was a sci-fi romance novel that Brad wanted to write, we would both argue that the way to do that is to take the class leader, whatever on the market is producing the best book. So for me, it would be like a Scholastic children's book, the best one that they make. I'm going to make my children's book look physically as good, if not better, than the best Scholastic book. And that's the way I let my audience know that, like, listen, I'm not effing around. I'm trying to make a really beautiful book here. I'm not just trying to put some pulpy thing out that looks like crap and falls apart in 6 months. This is going to be a really good book. And that's the way I think over time I've engendered trust with my readers, because I've really tried, especially the last 6 and 7 books that I've been doing, have really been on par with, honestly, the best that is put out in the market. And so if you do that, you slowly gain a reputation of like, oh, I can trust that this book is going to be well made because Dave made it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's how an independent novelist or an independent children's book publisher, self-publisher, could make themselves known, is you just put out really quality books. Brad, final thoughts?
Final thought. This person says that these independents are looked at as less than professional, and I just want to make the final point that for most of the early days of webcomics, we were looked at as less than professional. It didn't mean that we were less than professional. It didn't mean anything that we were looked at as less than professional. We made a living despite that. We built this thing up, and so I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about whether you or your peers or the audience looks at you as being less than professional.
Yes, and here's the proof in the pudding. Brad, you tell me who's more professional. Brad self-publishing his books, having a Patreon, having a website, right? That's column A. Column B, a cartoonist in newspapers, published by a well-known publisher, but is making far less money than Brad. So you tell me which one's more professional. Like, the proof is in the pudding, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me which one's a better looker.
Well, definitely Brad Guigar. I can't wait for Brad's autobiography romance novel, you know? Brad slowly unbuttoned his shirt as he entered the car part supply store.
Inward, downward, outward, upward.
Yes. The belly slowly flopped out of his shirt.
Yeah, you heard of shifter romance. I would be shiftless romance. Oh, God. And listen, before we take that any further, I want to tell you, you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making making a living from comics.
That's right. Your hosts have been Brad Guigar, who I will absolutely be calling after the show to get more about what these romance novels are. The editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, my friend, and the co-director of Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomics.com. I'm sorry, drivecomic.com.
That's okay. We've only been doing this 2 years. And this week's episode was sponsored by the kind folks over at Wacom at WACOM. Go have a look at their fantastic products, Wacom again. And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes was edited by our pal Matt Woodard at Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So we're going to go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab. Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, have you ever listened to audio erotica? Oh
Do
my
you know
God.
me at all?
Oh my, well.
And I'm out. I'm out, everybody. I'll
send you some good ones.
We'll